Get down! The word tore out of Ethan Cole's chest like a gunshot itself. Raw, absolute, final. 1 second he was mopping a floor no one noticed. The next, his body was already moving. Not from thought, not from choice, but from something deeper. Something soldiers never lose, no matter how many years of silence they pile on top of it. He hit her, hard. They crashed to the stage together. The bullet screamed past where her head had been. And then, silence. A janitor, lying on top of a billionaire, bleeding. But here's the part nobody saw coming. He already knew this night was going to end in blood. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. Subscribe and hit that bell so you never miss what happens next. The night Ethan Cole saved Victoria Sterling's life, he almost didn't show up for work. That's the part that doesn't make the news. That's the part that gets buried under the headlines and the photographs and the slow-motion security footage they loop on every cable network for a week straight. Nobody talks about the fact that Ethan sat in his truck for 11 minutes in the parking garage of the Meridian Grand Hotel, engine idling, staring at the steering wheel like it owed him an apology. He had a headache that had been sitting behind his left eye since Tuesday. His boots were still damp from a burst pipe he'd fixed on level 3 the night before. And his daughter, Lily, his 9-year-old, sharp-tongued, big-hearted Lily, had cried at breakfast. Not loud crying, the quiet kind. The kind that follows you into your chest and stays there all day. You always have to go at night, Daddy. I know, baby. Who's going to tuck me in? Mrs. Petrov next door. She said she would. She smells like soup. Lily. She does, Daddy. Old soup. Even then, even in the middle of a morning that smelled like burnt toast and wet dog, because they had neither toast nor a dog, but somehow the apartment still managed both smells. Even then, she'd made him laugh. Just a little. Just enough. He pulled out his phone and looked at the last photo he'd taken of her. She was wearing his old army cap, the one she'd found in a box he kept under the bed, the one he'd told her 100 times not to touch. She had it pulled down crooked over her left ear, and she was grinning at the camera with 2 missing front teeth and 0 regret. He locked the phone, got out of the truck, grabbed his gear bag. 11 minutes wasted. Let's go, Cole. The Meridian Grand wasn't the kind of hotel where guys like Ethan were supposed to be seen. It was the kind of place where the carpet cost more per square foot than his monthly rent, where the chandeliers in the lobby threw off enough light to make you squint, and where every surface seemed to whisper, "You don't belong here." Ethan had worked there for 2 years. He'd learned to be invisible. That wasn't self-pity talking. Invisible was a skill. In the army, in Fallujah, in the kind of neighborhoods he'd grown up in, being invisible kept you alive. You moved quiet. You watched corners. You read a room before the room could read you. He clocked in at 9:47 p.m. His supervisor, a round man named Gerald who perpetually looked like he was calculating how little he could get away with, barely glanced up from his phone. "Big night," Gerald said. "Some tech gala up on 12. Sterling Industries. Full buyout of the ballroom." "I heard," Ethan said. "So stay out of the way. The event coordinator already told me. Maintenance doesn't step foot above the 10th floor unless there's a structural emergency. You hear me? Structural. Not the bathroom smells funny. Not a lights out. Structural. Got it. I mean it, Cole. These people spend more on one dinner than you make in a year. Last thing they want is—" Gerald waved a vague hand in Ethan's direction, gesturing at all of him. Ethan looked at Gerald. He didn't say anything. He'd learned that too. that silence, held long enough, made most people deeply uncomfortable. Gerald cleared his throat. "Just stay below 10. "Yes, sir," Ethan said, and walked away. He started on the lower floors. Routine work. A loose panel in the utility corridor on level 2, a drain that needed clearing in the gym on level 4, a guest on level 6 who'd somehow managed to jam a keycard into the door mechanism in a way that required 15 minutes of careful work and the patience of a man who had genuinely seen worse. He worked alone. That was how he preferred it. Some of the other maintenance guys tried to talk to him at first, back when he'd started. They'd invite him for break room coffee, ask him where he was from, try to figure out the scar on his right forearm that disappeared under his sleeve. He wasn't rude about it. He just didn't give them much to work with. Eventually, they stopped trying. He wasn't sure if that was a success or a failure. Most nights, he didn't have the energy to figure out which. By 11:15, he was on level 7, replacing a flickering fluorescent tube in a service hallway when he heard the elevator banks go quiet. He didn't think anything of it at first. Late-night gala crowd going up, coming down. Normal. Then he heard the radio chatter. Ethan had a maintenance channel on the small walkie-talkie clipped to his belt. It was mostly used for mundane things, Gerald telling someone to bring a mop, or a front desk call about a guest complaint. But the frequency was shared, loosely, with the hotel's security team. And what he was hearing now wasn't mundane. It was clipped. Too clipped. Unit 4, confirm position. East stairwell, level 12. Do not approach. I repeat, do not... And then static. Ethan stopped. He stood very still, the way he used to stand in doorways in Fallujah, when something in the air changed. When the street went too quiet, or a car was parked where no car should be, or a kid who'd been playing outside 30 seconds ago was suddenly gone. His heart didn't race. It never raced in those moments. It did the opposite. It slowed down, steadied, like it was making room. Something is wrong. He clipped the fluorescent tube back into place, picked up his gear bag, walked, not ran, never run. Running triggers panic in everyone around you. To the elevator. He pressed the button for level 12. He knew Gerald was going to have his head. He genuinely didn't care. Level 12. The Meridian Ballroom. It was spectacular, in the way that things are spectacular when you've been trained to appreciate them, while simultaneously cataloging every entrance and exit. Double doors at the front. Service entrance to the east. Emergency exit at the back of the stage. Windows that didn't open. 3 bars. 15 tables of 10. A stage at the north wall, currently occupied by a sound system, and a podium with the Sterling Industries logo projected behind it. Ethan stepped out of the service elevator, which opened into a narrow back corridor behind the stage. He wasn't supposed to be here. He pulled his cap down out of habit, which was funny in retrospect, because nobody was looking at him anyway. The corridor ran the length of the stage. On his left, he could see through a crack in the curtain panel, the ballroom in full swing. Maybe 200 people, waiters moving between tables, a string quartet in the far corner, the clinking of glasses, the kind of laughter that costs something. And at the center of it all, at a table nearest the stage, in a custom wheelchair with what appeared to be integrated technical equipment on its arms, was Victoria Sterling. He'd seen her photo. Everyone in the building had been given a briefing sheet by the event coordinator. CEO, Sterling Industries. Forbes list. Net worth in the billions. Accessibility requirements. Electric wheelchair. Private medical aid on site. The photo had been professional, corporate. It had made her look like a symbol, not a person. In real life, She was different. She sat straight, straight as an arrow actually, with the kind of posture that comes from deciding, consciously, every single day, to take up exactly as much space as you are entitled to. She had sharp, dark eyes that moved constantly, reading the room. She was talking to someone beside her, and even from this distance, even in the middle of a crowded ballroom, she projected the specific gravity of a person that other people involuntarily orbit. Ethan had met people like that before. Generals. The good ones, anyway. The ones who'd earned the weight they carried. He watched her for 2 seconds. Then he looked away. He was looking for the thing that had made that radio go wrong. He found it in the east corridor. Not immediately. He moved through the back passage, slow and deliberate, checking corners. One of the hotel's security guards, young guy, pale, first year on the job, Ethan could tell from the way he was holding the radio, was pressed against the wall at the corridor junction, whispering into his earpiece. Ethan put a hand on the kid's shoulder. The kid nearly jumped out of his skin. "Easy," Ethan said quietly. "Maintenance. What do you have?" The kid stared at him. "You're not supposed to—" "I know where I'm not supposed to be. What do you have?" Something in Ethan's voice. Not volume, not aggression, just the flat, calm certainty of a man who has asked that exact question in places far worse than this, made the kid answer. "2 men. We flagged them at the entrance. They had credentials. They checked out. But the metal detectors went off, and they said it was belt hardware, and our supervisor cleared them through because of—" The kid swallowed. "Because of the client. Because Miss Sterling's team pushed back on additional screening." "Where are they now?" "We lost them. East stairwell camera went out 20 minutes ago. We have 1 confirmed sighting on level 11. The second—" The kid's radio crackled. His face went white. "The second one just got picked up on ballroom perimeter." Ethan was already moving. "Sir, you can't—" "Call the police," Ethan said, not looking back. "Right now. Don't wait for your supervisor. Call them." He came through the side curtain panel into the ballroom. Nobody looked at him. He was a man in a gray maintenance uniform carrying a tool bag. He was wallpaper. He was a ghost. He moved along the far wall, reading the room the way he'd been trained, not looking directly at anything, using peripheral, letting the picture build. 200 people, 6 waiters, 4 bartenders, 2 visible security positions, 1 on each main door, both of them standing straight, hands clasped, looking out, not in. Rookie configuration. Designed for a party, not a threat. A stage set up for a presentation. Victoria Sterling's table, 6 feet from the stage stairs. She was laughing now at something, her hand raised slightly from the wheelchair's armrest. And for just a second, watching her, Ethan thought, she has no idea. That thought hit him harder than he expected. He scanned the perimeter. East wall. A man standing near the bar. Tall. Dark jacket. Holding a drink he hadn't touched. Eyes moving. There. The man's jacket hung wrong. Left side. Below the shoulder. The weight was off. Ethan knew what that weight meant. He started walking toward the stage. It happened faster than anyone expected, which is how it always happens. The man at the bar moved, not toward Ethan, toward the stage. He pulled the weapon on the move, keeping it below waist level, and the first person who saw it was a waiter who dropped a tray with a crash that turned every head in the room. In the half-second of confused silence that followed, before the screaming started, the man raised the weapon and pointed it directly at the stage, at the podium, at the microphone, at Victoria Sterling, who had just that moment been helped to the stage by her aide and was standing at the podium with one hand braced on its edge, looking out at the room with those dark, steady eyes, completely exposed, completely still. She didn't run. Ethan would think about that later. She didn't duck or flinch. She looked straight at the man pointing a gun at her, and her face didn't break. But she was in a wheelchair. She'd just stood. She couldn't move fast enough. Ethan was 15 feet away. He didn't think. Thinking takes time. The body knows things the brain has to catch up to. "Get down!" His voice came out like a thunderclap, filling the room. And then he was on the stage. 3 steps, momentum, everything. And his shoulder hit Victoria Sterling full in the side, one arm wrapping around her, pulling her down and behind the podium as the gunshot tore through the space where her head had been. They hit the stage floor hard. He came down on top of her, covering her, arms over her head. Chaos. Screaming. Another shot, this one into the ceiling. Warning or panic, didn't matter. More screaming. The sound of people running, chairs overturning, glass breaking. Victoria Sterling, flat on her back on the stage floor, looked up at Ethan Cole, who was bleeding from his shoulder. She could see it now, the fabric of his gray uniform darkening, and said, "You're hit." "I know," he said. "You're the janitor," she said. Her voice was completely steady, like she was noting a fact for the record. "Maintenance," he said. "You just stay down," he said. "It's not over." And he was right. Because the first man was down. Hotel security had tackled him in the confusion. But the second man, the one from the east corridor, the one they'd lost, was coming through the service door at the side of the stage. Ethan heard the door. He looked up. The man had a gun. He was raising it. Ethan had a tool bag. And there's a moment. Veterans know it. First responders know it. Anybody who's ever been in the place where training ends and everything gets real. There's a moment where time doesn't exactly slow down, but it clarifies. Everything unnecessary falls away. What's left is just the problem and the solution. Ethan was on his feet before the second man had fully raised the weapon. He threw the tool bag, not at the man, at the gun hand. It was a heavy bag, a 14-pound bag with a pipe wrench and a full set of socket tools. And it connected with the man's forearm with enough force to deflect the shot into the wall. And then Ethan closed the distance in 2 steps. What happened in the next 8 seconds is not something that translates cleanly into a news broadcast, or a press conference, or a profile piece in a business magazine. What happened was a man who had spent 3 tours learning how to keep people alive using whatever was available to him, doing exactly that. The second attacker went down. Ethan stood over him, breathing hard. Blood was coming through his shirt sleeve now. Not a river, but enough. The shoulder. In and through, he thought distantly. Hurts like a son of a gun. But the bone held. Security was flooding in from every door. Police sirens somewhere below. The room was still a mess of upturned chairs and shattered glass, and 200 people who had just experienced the worst dinner of their lives. From behind the podium, Victoria Sterling's voice. "Maintenance man." He turned. She had pulled herself to a seated position against the podium. Her dress was torn at the hem. Her hair had come loose on one side. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't immediately read. Not fear, not gratitude. Something harder and more complicated than either of those. "You're bleeding on my stage," she said. "I'll add it to your invoice," he said. She stared at him for a long moment. Then, despite everything, the gun smoke and the broken glass and the sound of police boots on marble, and the whole beautiful catastrophic wreckage of the night, despite all of it, Victoria Sterling laughed. It was short, almost surprised, like it had gotten away from her before she could stop it. And Ethan Cole, bleeding and tired, with an 11-minute parking garage delay still sitting somewhere at the back of his mind, and his daughter at home with Mrs. Petrov and the old soup smell, looked down at the most powerful woman in the room, maybe the most powerful woman he'd ever seen, sitting on the floor of her own ruined gala, and he thought, she's going to be okay. That was the whole thought. That was all of it. Not, I'm a hero. Not, my life just changed. Not, she owes me something. Just, she's going to be okay. He sat down beside her on the stage floor. The adrenaline was leaving now, the way it always did, like a tide going out, fast and final, leaving everything heavier. Your aide, he said. Where? She got out. She's fine. Victoria paused. Are you going to pass out? Probably not. You don't sound certain. I've had worse. She looked at his shoulder, at the blood. Something moved across her face. Controlled, but there. Where? He looked at her. He didn't answer right away. Outside, the police were coming through the doors. Someone was calling for paramedics. The string quartet's instruments were still on their stands in the corner, abandoned. One bow lying on the floor. A long time ago, he said finally. Different country. Different kind of night. Victoria Sterling looked at him. Really looked at him, in the way that powerful people almost never look at maintenance workers, and said quietly, What's your name? Ethan, he said. Ethan Cole. She held out her hand. He took it. Victoria Sterling, she said. Like he didn't know. Like they were meeting for the first time, properly, the way it was supposed to be done. I owe you my life, Ethan Cole. You don't owe me anything, he said. That, she said, is where you're wrong. The paramedics arrived at the stage steps. Ethan let them help him up. And somewhere across the city, in a third-floor apartment that smelled inexplicably of burnt toast and old soup, a 9-year-old girl with 2 missing front teeth and her father's army cap was sitting at the window, waiting. She didn't know yet, but she was about to find out exactly who her father was. And so was the rest of the world. Drop your city in the comments below. Let's see how far Ethan's story travels. If you felt something reading this, hit that subscribe button. Part 2 is coming, and trust me, the hospital scene changes everything. The paramedics wouldn't let him walk off the stage on his own, which annoyed him considerably. He tried. He got 1 foot under himself, pushed up, and the room tilted in a way that suggested his body had opinions about the evening that differed from his own. The younger of the 2 paramedics, a woman with red hair pulled back tight and the no-nonsense grip of someone who had wrestled bigger men than Ethan into stretchers, caught his arm before he went sideways. Sir, sit. I'm fine. You've been shot. I'm aware. Then sit down and let me do my job, or I will make you sit down. Ethan looked at her. He decided she meant it. He sat. Victoria Sterling, still on the floor 3 feet away, watched this exchange with what appeared to be genuine interest. Her aide, a compact, efficient woman named Dana, who had reappeared at the stage steps the moment the police swept the room, was crouching beside her, speaking quietly. Victoria wasn't listening to Dana. She was watching Ethan. Does it hurt? She asked. What? Your shoulder. Does it hurt? Yes. You didn't make a sound when it happened. Making sounds doesn't help. She considered that. No, she said slowly. I suppose it doesn't. Dana touched her arm. Miss Sterling, the police need a statement, and the car is... The car can wait. Victoria. Dana. Just the name. Just the tone. Dana went quiet. The paramedic was cutting away Ethan's sleeve now, and he looked down at the wound with the detached interest of a man inspecting damage to something that belonged to him, but wasn't exactly him. Through and through, clean. The bullet had taken a piece of muscle along the back of the shoulder, but missed the joint, missed the artery, missed everything that would have made this a different kind of night. "Lucky," the paramedic said. "Story of my life," Ethan said, which wasn't even slightly true, but it seemed like the right thing to say. Across the ballroom, the police were moving people out in organized groups, taking names, documenting. The two attackers were in cuffs, one being loaded onto a gurney, conscious and silent, the other sitting against the far wall with zip ties on his wrists and a look on his face that Ethan recognized, the look of a man who'd made a calculation and gotten it wrong. A detective in a gray suit was making his way toward the stage. He had the particular walk of a man who'd been doing this long enough that nothing surprised him anymore, but everything still mildly irritated him. "Miss Sterling," he said, pulling out a notepad. Then he noticed Ethan. "And you are?" "Ethan Cole, maintenance." The detective looked at Ethan's shoulder, at the blood, at the paramedic working on him. He looked back at Ethan with an expression that recalibrated slightly. "You're the one who took the shot?" "I'm the one who moved her out of the way. The shot was a consequence." "He also neutralized the second attacker," Victoria said, "by himself, with a tool bag." The detective wrote something down. "A tool bag." 14 pounds, Ethan said, give or take. The detective looked up. Something almost like respect crossed his face, and then the professional mask came back down. "I'm going to need full statements from both of you. Tonight, if possible. Tomorrow morning at the latest." "Tonight," Victoria said. "Miss Sterling, given the circumstances, tomorrow would be—" "Tonight," she said again. "I want to know who sent them. I want to know why. And I want to know if there are more." The detective looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded. "We'll do it here. 20 minutes. He walked away to talk to his officers. Dana appeared again at Victoria's elbow, this time with a wheelchair, and there was a brief, private moment. Ethan looked away, giving her that, while Dana helped Victoria back into it. He heard the small sound of effort Victoria made and didn't comment on it. The same way he wouldn't have commented if someone had stumbled on a curb. It wasn't his business. What was his business was the call he needed to make. He pulled out his phone. The screen had a crack across the bottom corner that hadn't been there before. Somewhere in the fall, he figured. He unlocked it and dialed. 3 rings. Then a groggy, suspicious voice that nevertheless shot straight to the center of his chest. "Daddy?" "Hey, Bug." A pause. "It's really late." I know it is. I just wanted to hear your voice." "Is something wrong?" She was 9, but she was old in the way that kids become old when it's just the two of them, and they've learned to read the weather of a parent's voice from 100 emotional miles away. "Everything's fine," he said. "Everything is okay. I just wanted to check in." "Mrs. Petroff made me drink warm milk. It was gross." "Warm milk is good for you." "Warm milk is soup that doesn't know what it is." He laughed. It pulled at his shoulder, and he swallowed the wince. "Go back to sleep, Lily." "When are you coming home?" "Little later than usual. But I'll be there before you wake up. I promise."
Pinky promise or regular promise?
"Pinky promise."
Okay. A beat.
"Daddy?" "Yeah?"
"I love you the biggest."
Something tightened in his throat that had nothing to do with the shoulder. "I love you the biggest too, Bug. Go to sleep." He ended the call, sat with the phone in his hand for a moment. Then he put it back in his pocket and looked up and found Victoria Sterling watching him with that same unreadable expression from earlier. The complicated one. The one that wasn't quite gratitude and wasn't quite something else. "Your daughter?" she asked. "Yeah."
"How old?"
9. She was quiet for a moment. She doesn't know? Not yet. I'd like to keep it that way until I can tell her myself. Victoria looked at the phone in his pocket, then back at him. You called her first, before calling anyone else. She's the only one I needed to call. Something shifted in Victoria's face. Subtle, like a crack in a surface that's been engineered to show none. She looked away toward the ballroom, where the police were still working the room, and her jaw set in that way that Ethan was already starting to recognize as her default when she was processing something she didn't want to process. I don't have anyone like that, she said. It didn't sound like self-pity. It sounded like a fact being entered into a ledger, cold, precise, and because of that precision, somehow much worse. Ethan didn't say anything. He'd learned that some statements weren't invitations to respond. They were just truths that needed to be spoken out loud once before they could be put away. The statements took 40 minutes, not 20. Ethan's was detailed and clean. Dates, positions, observations, sequence of events. The detective asked twice if he had military experience, and both times Ethan said yes without elaborating. And both times the detective wrote something down that was probably more than a single word. Victoria's statement was different. She spoke in the careful, measured way of a person who has spent years being quoted, who knows that every word is potentially a headline. But there were moments, just moments, when the control slipped slightly. When the detective asked her if she had any idea who might have ordered the attack, her hands tightened on the armrests of her wheelchair, and she said, I have several ideas, with a flatness that suggested those ideas were not abstract. When the detective left to confer with his partner, Ethan looked at her. It wasn't random. It wasn't a question. She heard that and answered accordingly. No, she said, it wasn't. Corporate? She looked at him sideways. You got all that from one question? You didn't say, I don't know. You didn't say, I can't imagine. You said you had ideas. People who get randomly targeted don't have ideas. People who are in the middle of something have ideas. Victoria Sterling studied him for a moment in a way that made Ethan feel like he was being evaluated for a position he hadn't applied for. Sterling Industries is in the middle of a merger, she said carefully. There are parties who would benefit significantly if I were removed from the equation before it closes. Removed. It's a polite word. So is merger. The corner of her mouth moved. You're not what I expected, Ethan Cole. What did you expect? Honestly, I didn't expect anything. I didn't think about you at all. Which, she paused, is something I'm going to have to sit with. He didn't have an answer to that either. He appreciated that she didn't seem to want one. Dana reappeared with a phone and a look that indicated the outside world had been waiting patiently and was no longer willing to do so. The board is calling. Your lawyer is calling. Reuters got wind of the incident, and they're already running with it. And, she lowered her voice slightly, your father called. Something happened to Victoria's face at that last one. Quick and dark, like a shadow crossing fast. Tell him I'll call him back. He said it was urgent. It always is, Victoria said. Tell him I'll call him back. Dana withdrew. Ethan filed that information away without comment. There was a story there. More than one, probably. But it wasn't tonight's story. Tonight already had enough. The paramedic had finished dressing his shoulder and was filling out paperwork. You need to go to the hospital, she said, not looking up. Tonight, not tomorrow. Get that imaged, get it properly cleaned, get antibiotics started. I'll go in the morning. She looked up. Tonight. I have to, Mr. Cole. She stopped writing. I have worked on people who said, I'll go tomorrow, and didn't. I am asking you, as a person who does not want to add your name to that list. Go tonight. He recognized the tone. It was the same tone he'd used on a corporal named Reyes in a fob outside Ramadi, who'd been hiding a wound for 3 days because he didn't want to miss the rotation. Ethan had been 26 years old, and he'd used exactly that tone. And Reyes had gone, and the wound had been infected, and the doctor had said, another 24 hours, and it would have been a different conversation. "All right," he said, "tonight." She nodded and went back to her paperwork, satisfied. "I'll have my car take you," Victoria said. "That's not necessary." "My driver is better than a cab, and faster than waiting for a rideshare, and I am asking you not to argue with me about this." He looked at her. "Do people argue with you often?" "Constantly," she said. "I don't recommend it." "Noted." She held his gaze. "Accept the ride, Ethan." He accepted the ride. The car was a black SUV, immaculate, with leather seats that cost more than Ethan's furniture, and a driver named Marcus, who greeted him with the professional warmth of someone who was very good at his job and very private about himself. Ethan appreciated that. They were 3 blocks from the hotel when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something, instinct, habit, the lingering edge of an evening that had already surprised him twice, made him pick up. "Mr. Cole?" "Who's this?" "My name is Richard Holt. I'm the head of security for Sterling Industries." A pause. "I understand you had quite a night." "You could say that." "I want to start by saying that what you did was extraordinary. Genuinely. I've been in this business for 23 years, and I've seen, what do you want, Mr. Holt?" A beat. The shift in approach was smooth, but noticeable. "I want to make sure you understand the situation you've stepped into. I stepped into a ballroom. 2 men tried to shoot your boss. I stopped them. You stopped 2 of them," Holt said carefully. Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Say what you mean. The threat to Miss Sterling didn't begin tonight, and it didn't end tonight. These 2 men were hired. The people who hired them are still out there. And right now, you are a very public part of this story, whether you want to be or not." Another pause. "By tomorrow morning, your name and face are going to be on every news platform in the country. You have a daughter." The last sentence was not a question. Ethan felt something go cold and still inside him. Not fear, something colder than fear. "Are you threatening me?" "Absolutely not. I'm informing you. There's a difference. What I'm saying is that the people who arranged tonight may see you as unfinished business, and I think you deserve to know that before you walk into a hospital waiting room and fall asleep in a plastic chair." Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror. Ethan looked straight ahead. "What are you suggesting?" Ethan said. "Ms. Sterling has resources, security resources. I'd like to extend some of those to you and your daughter on a temporary basis until we understand what we're dealing with. It's not charity. It's not obligation. It is, in my professional opinion, necessary." "And Miss Sterling knows you're making this call?" "Miss Sterling asked me to make this call." Ethan watched the city lights slide past the window. He thought about Lily. He thought about Mrs. Petrov's apartment and the unlocked building door, and the fact that his own apartment had 1 deadbolt and a chain lock that he'd been meaning to replace for 6 months. "Okay," he said. "Okay?" "Send someone. But they stay outside. Nobody comes into the apartment unless I'm there and I let them in. And nobody talks to my daughter about any of this. She hears it from me or she doesn't hear it." "Understood. Completely." "And Holt." "Yes?" "If this is some kind of play, if there's an angle here I'm not seeing, I want you to know that I am very tired. I have a hole in my shoulder, and I am not in the mood." Holt's voice, to his credit, stayed level. "There's no angle, Mr. Cole. You saved her life. She takes that seriously." "All right. Get to the hospital. Get some rest. We'll talk more tomorrow." The call ended. Marcus, who had heard every word of it and given no indication of hearing any of it, said quietly from the front, "Almost there, Mr. Cole." "Thanks, Marcus." "For what it's worth," Marcus said, which wasn't something he usually said, Ethan could tell. "She doesn't make calls like that. Not for people. Usually it's contracts and logistics." He paused. "She's rattled. Good rattled, I think. But rattled." Ethan leaned his head back against the seat. His shoulder was a steady, specific pain now. Not screaming, but present. Insistent. The kind of pain that is actually almost useful because it keeps you focused. "She held up well," Ethan said. "She always holds up," Marcus said. "That's not the question. The question is what it costs her." They pulled up to the hospital entrance. Marcus got out first and opened the door. Not performatively, just practically, because Ethan's right arm wasn't cooperating with the door mechanism. And Ethan stepped out into the orange-lit entrance of the ER. "I'll wait," Marcus said. "You don't have to." "I'll wait," Marcus said again, with the quiet finality of a man who has made a decision and is done discussing it. Ethan looked at him, then nodded. He walked through the sliding doors into the fluorescent brightness of the emergency room, and behind him, Marcus leaned against the car with his hands folded and his eyes on the street, and his expression the same as always. Steady, watchful, professional. The ER was busy in the way that city ERs are always busy at midnight. Ethan gave his name at the desk. The triage nurse looked at the dressing on his shoulder and bumped him up the list without asking many questions. He sat in the waiting area, plastic chairs, exactly as Holt had predicted, and for the first time since he'd clocked in at 9:47, he closed his eyes. The night played back, not the shooting, not the adrenaline or the fall or the weight of a tool bag connecting with a man's forearm. That was just sequence. That was just mechanics. What played back was the smaller things, the things you don't talk about in statements or news reports. The look on Victoria Sterling's face when she'd been on the stage floor looking up at him. That fractured second before her control came back. The way she'd introduced herself. Victoria Sterling. Like they were starting over. Like the first part of the night didn't count. Like she wanted to begin properly. "You don't owe me anything." "That is where you're wrong." He thought about what she'd said, about not having anyone to call. He turned that over in his mind, the way you turn something over when it's heavier than it looks, and you're trying to figure out how it got that heavy. A woman with that much power, that much money, that much presence, sitting on the floor of her own ruined gala and saying, without drama, without performance, just as a simple statement of fact, "I don't have anyone like that." "Mr. Cole?" A doctor, young, tired, good eyes. "Come on back." Ethan stood, rolled his shoulder once out of habit, winced, stopped doing that. "Gunshot wound," the doctor said, looking at the intake form. It wasn't a question. "Busy night?" "You could say that," Ethan said, and followed him through the doors. He was out by 2:30 in the morning, cleaned, sutured, medicated, and carrying a prescription for antibiotics and a discharge sheet with instructions he already knew and didn't need. The doctor had been thorough and kind, and only slightly odd when he'd figured out, from the news alert that had apparently gone out around midnight, who exactly he was treating. "You're that guy," the doctor said, midway through suturing. "The janitor." "Maintenance," Ethan said. "Right, sorry. I saw it on my phone on break." He tied off a suture. "That was something." "Just reflex." "My reflex when someone points a gun is to become the floor," the doctor said. "So, you know, perspective." Marcus was still outside, still leaning on the car. He straightened when Ethan came through the doors and didn't say anything, just opened the door, which Ethan had decided was his preferred form of communication, and which he respected enormously. In the car, Marcus handed him a phone. Not Ethan's phone, a different one. New. Still in a partial wrapper. "From Ms. Sterling," Marcus said. "She said your screen is cracked, and that she'll feel better knowing there's a working number for you." Ethan held the phone, looked at it. "I can get my own phone fixed." "I know that," Marcus said. "And I suspect you know that's not really what this is about." Ethan put the phone in his jacket pocket. Not because he was accepting it. Not because he was rejecting it. Just to have somewhere to put it while he decided. "Take me home, Marcus." "Yes, sir." The city moved past the windows. Quieter now. The deep night quiet that belongs to the people who work when everyone else is sleeping. The maintenance men, and the nurses, and the cab drivers, and the guys who restock the grocery shelves, and the women who clean the office buildings before the day shift arrives. Ethan watched it go by. Somewhere behind him, at the Meridian Grand, detectives were still working. Evidence teams. Reporters camped on the sidewalk. His name was on the internet now. He could feel that certainty without looking. The way you can feel a weather change before it arrives. By morning, his life would not look like his life. He knew that. He'd known it on some level from the moment the shot fired, and he'd felt the burn in his shoulder and understood what it meant. The question he was sitting with now, quietly, alone, watching his city at 2:30 in the morning, through the window of a car that cost more than he'd made in the last 4 years, was not what happens next. The question was, what does Lily see when she finds out? What does she see when she turns on a television, or a phone, or a school computer, and sees her father's face? What does she understand? Does she understand the thing he'd tried to keep buried? The thing in him that doesn't sit still when it should, that reads rooms and clocks, distances, and never fully left a war that ended a decade ago. He wanted her to see a man who had protected someone. He needed her to understand why it was worth it. He was still working on the words when Marcus pulled up in front of his building, and the 2 men in dark jackets, standing at a discreet distance near the entrance, gave him a single nod that told him halt had been as good as his word. Ethan nodded back, went inside, climbed the stairs, stood outside his apartment door for a moment, hand on the frame, listening. Quiet. She was asleep. He unlocked the door and went in. Lily was on the couch, not in her bed. She'd dragged her blanket out and fallen asleep sitting up, which meant she'd been waiting. His army cap was on the cushion beside her, one hand wrapped around it, loose, even in sleep. He stood there and looked at her for a long time. Then he picked her up, carefully, slowly, favoring the shoulder, and carried her to her room and tucked her in and kissed her forehead, and she stirred just enough to murmur something that sounded like his name. Or maybe she was already dreaming. He sat on the edge of her bed until her breathing evened back out. By morning, he thought again. By morning, everything is different. But right now, in this room, in this quiet, none of that was true, yet. Right now she was just sleeping, and he was just her father. And that was enough. He didn't sleep. He tried. He lay on top of his covers with his boots off, and his arm across his chest, and the ceiling doing nothing interesting above him, and he tried. The shoulder throbbed in a steady, metronomic way that wasn't exactly painful anymore. The medication had taken the edge off, but was persistent enough to remind him every few minutes that he was not, in fact, fine. That the night had been real. That the blood on his shirt, which he'd balled up and dropped in the bathroom trash, had been real. Around 4 in the morning, he gave up and went to the kitchen and made coffee. He sat at the small table by the window with his mug and his phone. His cracked phone, not the new one, which was still in his jacket pocket, like an unanswered question. And he watched the sky do the slow, barely perceptible thing it does in the hour before dawn. The dark doesn't leave all at once. It just gets thinner, degree by degree, until suddenly you realize you can see the outline of the building across the street, and you can't tell exactly when that happened. His phone had 47 missed calls. He hadn't noticed until now. He scrolled through them without calling any back. Gerald, from work, 4 times, which was 4 more times than Ethan had expected. 2 numbers he didn't recognize. A reporter, probably, though he couldn't figure out how they'd gotten his number this fast. His sister in Tallahassee, which meant the story had already hit the national feed, and one from a number he recognized immediately, with a Louisville area code that made his jaw tighten in a way that had nothing to do with his shoulder. His father-in-law. He put the phone face down on the table. Ray Fulton had not spoken to Ethan in 2 years, not since the last time they'd stood in the same room, at the 1-year anniversary of Sarah's death, in Ray's kitchen, in a conversation that had started as grief and ended as a verdict. Ray had looked at him across that kitchen counter and said, with a particular cruelty of a man who loves someone so much that losing her has turned the love into shrapnel, "She'd still be here if you'd been home more, if the army hadn't made you whatever you are." Ethan had not responded. He'd picked up Lily, who was 3, who had her mother's mouth and her mother's laugh, and was already starting to forget her mother's face, and he'd walked out. And that had been that. 2 years of silence. And now Ray Fulton was calling at whatever time it was in Louisville, because his son-in-law was on the news. Ethan picked up his mug, put it down, stood up and went to check on Lily. She was on her side now, the army cap on the pillow next to her face like a stuffed animal. Her mouth was slightly open. She was absolutely, completely, peacefully asleep, and looking at her felt like being handed something back that you'd nearly lost. He went back to the kitchen, sat back down, and started figuring out what he was going to say to her in the morning. She found out before he could say anything. He'd planned it. He'd rehearsed the words in his head through the last gray hour before the sun came up. "Something happened at work last night, Bug. I need to tell you about it before you hear it from someone else." Clean, direct, honest enough without being frightening. He'd been a father for 9 years, and the most important thing he'd learned was that children don't fall apart from hard truths. They fall apart from the look on your face when you're trying to hide one. But Lily was 9, and she had a tablet, and she woke up at 6:45, and he heard her paving down the hall before he could intercept her. And then he heard her stop. And then he heard a sound he'd only heard from her a handful of times in her life. A sharp, small intake of breath, like the world had briefly stopped making sense. He was out of his chair before he'd decided to stand. She was in the hallway, tablet in both hands. On the screen, he could see it from where he stood, was a news feed. His face. The stage. The grainy security footage they always find, the kind that makes everything look like it happened in a different dimension. The headline read, "Hero Janitor Takes Bullet for Tech CEO at Luxury Gala." Lily was staring at the screen. She hadn't looked up yet. Lily. She looked up. Her eyes were wide and dry. She hadn't started crying yet. She was still in the stage before crying. The stage where the brain is trying to figure out if what it's seeing is real. "Daddy," she said, "that's you." "Yeah." "You got shot." "I did." Her face did something complicated. "You said everything was fine." "I said everything was okay." "That's the same thing." It's... He paused. "It's a little different." She looked at the tablet, then at him, then at the tablet again. Then, and this was Lily. This was entirely and completely Lily. She crossed the hallway in 3 steps and grabbed his left arm with both hands, not the injured side, instinctively, and pressed her forehead against his ribs and held on. He wrapped his good arm around her. "I'm okay," he said into her hair. "I'm right here. I'm okay." "You could have died," she said, and her voice was muffled and small and absolutely certain. "I didn't." "But you could have."
I could have also been hit by a bus on the way to work, he said. She pulled back and looked up at him with the specific expression she reserved for his most spectacular failures of logic. "That's not the same, and you know it." "No," he admitted, "it's not the same. Why didn't you tell me?" He crouched down to her level, favoring his right side. "Because it was 2 in the morning and you were asleep, and I wasn't going to wake you up and scare you when there was nothing you could do, and I was already fine. I would have wanted to know. I know you would have. But wanting to know and needing to know are different things too, Lily." She looked at him hard for a long moment, the way she did when she was deciding whether to accept something or push back on it. Then she looked at his shoulder, at the careful way he was holding it, the slight asymmetry of his posture. "Does it hurt?" "A little. A little for you, or a little for regular people?" "Somewhere in between," he said honestly. She reached up and very carefully, with one finger, touched the sleeve of his sweatshirt just below the shoulder. Barely a touch, lighter than a bird landing. "Okay," she said quietly. "But you have to tell me next time." "There's not going to be a next time." "Daddy." "Lily, promise me you'll tell me." He looked at her. She had Sarah's eyes. She had Sarah's way of cutting straight through to what actually mattered, past all the words that were trying to get in the way. "I promise," he said. "I'll tell you." She nodded, satisfied, in the way that only a 9-year-old can be satisfied by a promise. Completely and without reservation, and with a full expectation that it will be kept. "Can I see?" She held up the tablet. "After breakfast." "Daddy." "After breakfast, Lily. Eggs first, news second. That's a rule." "That is not a rule." "It is now." The phone started properly ringing at 7:30. Gerald called first. His voice was in a register Ethan had never heard from him, a strange, pressurized blend of panic and something that might have been genuine concern. Though with Gerald, it was always hard to disentangle concern for the person from concern for the liability. "Cole, tell me you're alive." "I'm alive, Gerald." "You're on the news." "I know." "You're on every news. The hotel's lawyer called me at 6 in the morning. 6! Cole, I have not been up at 6 voluntarily since 2009. "What did the lawyer say?" "That's the thing." A pause. "He wasn't calling to complain. He was calling to make sure we knew that the hotel is going to make a statement today, and they want to, and I am reading this directly off my notepad because I did not want to misquote, they want to appropriately recognize the heroic actions of Meridian Grand staff member Ethan Cole." Another pause. "That's you, Cole." "I know who Cole is, Gerald. I sent you up to 12. I told you to stay below 10. I heard something wrong on the radio." "You heard something wrong, and you went up, and you—" Gerald stopped. Started again. "Are you okay? Is your shoulder—" "I'm okay." A long exhale on Gerald's end. "You're not fired, obviously. Obviously, you're not fired. I just need you to know that when I said structural emergencies only, I did not anticipate—" "Gerald." "Yeah." "It's all right." Another pause, softer now. "You're a good man, Cole. I don't say that enough. I don't say it at all, actually. But you are." Ethan looked across the kitchen at Lily, who was eating her eggs with one eye on the tablet, which she had very definitely not been told she could use yet. "Thanks, Gerald." He ended the call. Lily looked up from the tablet with the expression of someone who has been caught and would prefer to discuss literally anything else. "There's a picture of you on here," she said. "A good one. You look serious."
put the tablet down. You really do look serious, though. Lily. Okay. She put it down, picked up her fork. The lady you saved. Is she nice? He thought about Victoria Sterling on the floor of her own stage. Victoria Sterling, I owe you my life. The way she'd introduced herself, like she wanted to start over. She's complicated, he said. What does that mean? It means she's a person with a lot of layers. Like an onion? A little like an onion, yeah. Lily considered this. Does she know about me? She knows I have a daughter. What did she say? She asked how old you were. Lily sat with that for a moment, turning it over. She had a gift for knowing when information was important. Are you going to see her again? Probably. For what? They want to talk to me about what happened, about... He paused. About some things. She watched him. About the people who tried to hurt her? Yeah. Are they still out there? He'd wondered how long it would take her to get there. The answer was 9 minutes from the first mention of the event to the question that cut to the actual center of it. She was her mother's daughter in that way, too. Sarah had never wasted time on the periphery of anything. There are some people keeping an eye on things, he said carefully. On us. For right now. Lily absorbed that, looked out the window. Is that why there are 2 men standing outside our building? He blinked. You saw them? Daddy, I looked out my window when I woke up. They're not very hidden. I'll tell them that. They should stand further apart, and one of them keeps looking at his phone. Ethan rubbed his face with his good hand. I'll tell them that too. She seemed satisfied. She finished her eggs. And then, because she was Lily, and this was how her mind worked, she said, I think what you did was brave, and I think I'm mad about it. And I think both of those things can be true at the same time. He looked at her. Yeah, he said. They can. Mrs. Petrov saw it on TV this morning. She came and knocked on the door at 6:30. What did she say? She cried, Lily said. And then she gave me a cinnamon roll and said something in Polish that I think was a blessing. That's very nice of her. She also said the men outside looked suspicious, and she was going to call the police. I'll go talk to her. You should probably do that soon. By 9 in the morning, the building's front steps were occupied. Not a mob, nothing that dramatic. But 3 news vans, 2 reporters with cameras, and a cluster of people with phones out who had apparently nothing else to do on a Thursday morning. Ethan watched them from the window while he was on the phone with Holt. It'll peak in 48 hours, and then move on to whatever the next story is, Holt said. Don't engage with them. Don't let your daughter go out alone. If you need to leave, Marcus can come. I need to come in, Ethan said. We need to talk about what you said last night, about the people who arranged this. Miss Sterling wants that meeting too, this afternoon, if you're up to it. I'm up to it. A pause. How's the shoulder? It's a shoulder. Right. Holt sounded like he'd been dealing with people like Ethan long enough to know not to push it. There's one more thing. Miss Sterling's father has requested a meeting with you. Ethan was quiet. Her father. Edward Sterling, chairman emeritus of the board. He's... Holt chose his words with the precision of a man navigating a minefield he knew well. A significant figure in all of this. How significant? The kind of significant that means I'd strongly suggest you don't agree to anything before speaking with Ms. Sterling first. That's a notable thing for her own head of security to say about her father. Yes, Holt said simply. It is. Victoria Sterling had not slept either, but she'd done it in a penthouse apartment with a security detail outside the door and a view of the city that cost approximately what Ethan made in a decade. She'd sat in the dark in her chair by the window and thought about the night. The way you take apart something that went wrong to understand every point where it could have gone differently. It could have gone differently at the entrance, when her security team let 2 armed men through because she'd pushed back on additional screening. She'd pushed back because she hated the way it felt. The scanning, the checking, the visible reminder of how vulnerable she actually was. How much of her daily life was managed and protected and controlled by people who were paid to believe she couldn't manage or protect herself. She'd pushed back out of pride, and pride had nearly gotten her killed. She was honest with herself about that. She had always been aggressively honest with herself, because in the world she lived in, there was nobody else who would be. Dana came in at 7 with coffee and a tablet showing the overnight news cycle. Victoria took the coffee, looked at the tablet, and said nothing for a long moment. There was footage. Of course there was footage. The Meridian Grand had 12 cameras in the ballroom alone. Someone on the security staff had already sold a clip. It was everywhere. 40 seconds of security video, grainy and silent, but absolutely, undeniably clear. A man in a gray maintenance uniform crossing a ballroom in 6 strides and throwing himself between a gunman and a woman in a wheelchair on a stage. The comment sections, Dana reported, reading from her phone in the careful tone she used for information she knew might land badly, were calling him everything from a war hero to a guardian angel to, bizarrely, a political symbol for about 11 different things he almost certainly had no opinion on. There's one network, Dana said, calling him the invisible hero, the janitor America never saw. He's not a janitor, Victoria said. Dana looked up. Sorry? Maintenance. He said maintenance. She set down the coffee. Get that corrected where you can. Dana made a note. Your father has called 3 times. I know. He's been in contact with the board. There's an emergency meeting request for this afternoon. I know that too. He's framing last night as a security failure that demonstrates leadership vulnerability. He wants the board to, I know what he wants, Dana. Dana stopped. Victoria was looking out the window with her hands still on the armrests, and her posture was the same as always. Straight, controlled, positioned forward. But her jaw was set in the way it got when she was not managing herself, but rather containing herself, which were meaningfully different things. He's going to use this, Victoria said. Not bitterly, just plainly, the way you state a law of physics. He has been waiting for an angle for 3 years, a reason to call my judgment into question, a reason to have the board look at whether the company can afford. She paused on the word, and it was the pause that said everything. Whether the company can afford a CEO with my particular limitations. Dana said nothing. The attack was real. The danger was real. And my father is going to stand in a boardroom this afternoon and explain, very reasonably, very calmly, that a disabled CEO represents an elevated security risk and a liability. A pause, and half the board will agree with him. What do you want to do? Dana asked. Victoria turned from the window. I want to talk to Ethan Cole. Holt is arranging, not for security reasons, Victoria said. I want to talk to him. Dana looked at her. Okay. He said I don't owe him anything. I heard. He was wrong about that, Victoria said, but not in the way he thinks. The meeting happened at 2 in the afternoon, in a conference room on the 14th floor of the Sterling Industries building downtown. Ethan arrived with Marcus, who had apparently been assigned to him now in a permanent-ish way that nobody had formally announced, but everyone seemed to have accepted. He was wearing a clean shirt, his best one, dark blue, which Lily had specifically selected and pressed with the iron she used better than he did. And his arm was in a soft sling that he'd been told to use for the next 5 days, and which he suspected would last approximately 2.
Holt met them at the elevator. He was a solid, compact man in his 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and the eyes of someone who had learned not to be surprised by human behavior in either direction. He shook Ethan's hand with both of his and said simply, "Thank you. For what it's worth, for me personally. Thank you." "You're welcome," Ethan said. "Your guys outside my building need to stop looking at their phones." Holt actually smiled. "I'll pass that along." The conference room was glass-walled and city-lit and overlooked downtown in the particular way that money overlooks everything. From above, with the lights arranged just so. Victoria was already there, at the head of the table, in a position that made clear she had chosen it deliberately. She was in a different chair, a lighter, more streamlined model than the one from the gala, Ethan noticed. And she was in a dark suit, with her hair pulled back. And she looked like she'd slept 8 hours, even though he was reasonably sure she hadn't slept at all. She looked at him when he came in. "You look worse than you did last night," she said. "Thank you," he said. "You look exactly the same." "I'll take that." She gestured to the chair across from her. He sat. Holt took a position by the door. "How's your shoulder?" "You already asked Holt that." "I wanted your answer." "It's fine." "You're going to keep saying that until it's actually fine, aren't you?" "Pretty much." She looked at him for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, she said, "My father wants to meet you." Holt mentioned, "Don't." He looked at her. She was looking back at him with absolute directness. "He's going to offer you something. Money, probably. Or a position. Something that sounds like recognition, but is actually designed to make a particular narrative. That last night was manageable. That it was handled. That there is no reason to question the company's leadership, or my judgment, or my fitness for this role. And you don't want me to take it. I don't want you to take anything from anyone," she said, "before you understand what it's actually for." Ethan put his good arm on the table. "Including what you're offering." She didn't flinch. "Including that, yes." "What are you offering?" "Honestly?" She sat back slightly, and in that slight movement, just for a second, the CEO came down a register, and something more tired, more real, took its place. "I don't know yet. I know I want to. I know you deserve more than what happened to you last night, which is that you saved my life and got shot for it, and then went to an ER alone, and went home, and tucked in your daughter, and didn't ask anyone for anything." "I'm here, aren't I?" he said. "You are. So ask." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city moved and glittered, and did the endless, indifferent things cities do, regardless of what is decided inside any particular room. "The people who sent those men last night," she said, "are still out there, and they know who you are now. You're not invisible anymore, Ethan." It was the first time she'd used his first name without the last. He noticed. "No," he said, "I'm not." "That changes things for you, for your daughter." "I know. I can protect you, professionally, financially, physically. I have the resources to make your life significantly safer than it is right now." She held his gaze. "But I'm not going to pretend that's purely altruistic. If you're visible, and you're connected to me, then how you're treated reflects on what this company is, on what I say it is. And I have a board meeting in—" She glanced at the slim watch on her wrist. "2 hours, where my father is going to argue that I am a liability. And right now, the only person in the city who actually knows what happened last night, who was there, who saw what I did and what I didn't do, who can say with authority that I did not hide and I did not break, is you." The room was very quiet. So, Ethan said slowly, you need a witness. I need the truth, Victoria said, and you're the only one holding it right now. He looked at her, really looked, the way he'd looked at people in situations where what they said next would determine what happened after. He'd gotten good at reading the line between what someone wanted and what they actually needed. It was the same line, usually, that they were most afraid to look at directly. Victoria Sterling was not afraid to look at it. That was the thing. She was sitting here, laying out the exact calculus of her vulnerability and her need with her eyes open, because she had decided that he deserved that honesty, even if it cost her something. Tell me about your father, he said. And she did. Edward Sterling was 71 years old and had never once in his life walked into a room without knowing exactly what was going to happen in it. That was not an accident. It was the product of 50 years of deliberate, methodical control, of information, of people, of the particular architecture of any situation that might otherwise develop a will of its own. He had built Sterling Industries from a regional tech firm into a global entity, and he had done it the way men of his generation and temperament did such things. By being the smartest person in every room, by trusting no one with more than they needed to know, and by treating sentiment as a luxury that other, softer people could afford. He had one child, a daughter. He had wanted a son. He'd never said it out loud, but Victoria had known it since she was 6 years old, and old enough to read the particular quality of silence that follows a disappointment that cannot be spoken. And then, when she was 24, the accident. The car. The surgeries. The prognosis that the doctors delivered with the careful, cushioned language of people who knew they were not just delivering medical information, but dismantling a future. Edward Sterling had stood in that hospital corridor and made a calculation. Victoria had seen him do it. She had been lying in a bed 10 feet away, separated from him by a half-open door, and she had watched her father's face while he spoke to the doctor, and she had seen the exact moment when grief became strategy. When the question shifted from, will she be okay, to, what does this mean for the company? She had never forgiven him for that. She had also never stopped trying to prove him wrong, which was, she understood now, perhaps the same thing as not forgiving him, just with better posture. Ethan listened to all of this without interrupting. He had the quality, rare she was finding, of listening not to prepare a response, but to actually understand. He sat across from her with his good arm on the table and his eyes steady, and he let her talk. And she found herself saying things she hadn't said to Dana, or to her lawyers, or to anyone who was paid to hear them. He never challenged me openly, she said. That's not his style. He works through suggestion, through concern. He calls board members personally, not to lobby. He would never call it lobbying. Just to check in, to share his worry. He's very good at worry. It sounds like love. Is it? Ethan asked. She considered the question seriously. I think it started as love. I think love, for my father, became indistinguishable from ownership at some point, and he genuinely cannot tell the difference anymore. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, what happened with the merger, the one that got people killed? She straightened slightly, not defensively, just the way she always straightened when she moved from personal territory to operational territory, the way a person shifts gears. Caldwell Tech. We've been in acquisition talks for 14 months. It closes in 11 days. When it does, Sterling Industries becomes the largest independent data infrastructure company in the country. The valuation change is, she paused, significant. There are 3 parties who lose substantially if that deal closes with me at the helm. Who? One is a competitor who's been trying to acquire Caldwell themselves.
One is a hedge fund that shorted our stock last quarter and needs the deal to fall apart to cover their position. She paused. And one is my father.
The room absorbed that.
Explain, Ethan said. When I took over as CEO, my father retained a consultancy contract, advisory capacity nominally. In reality, a mechanism to keep his hand in decisions he no longer had the title to make. The merger, if it closes, restructures the board. His consultancy gets absorbed into a new governance model. His influence, the informal kind, the kind that actually matters, goes to zero. And he'd rather the company not close the deal than lose that influence. He would never admit that, to himself or anyone else. He genuinely believes he's acting in the company's best interest. That's what makes him effective. A pause. And dangerous. Ethan looked at her steadily. Do you think your father ordered the attack? She met his eyes. No. I think he's leveraging it. There's a difference. Is there? Yes, she said, and her voice was flat and final, in a way that said, I have thought about this more than you can imagine, and I have arrived at this answer, and I am not going to revisit it today. There is. Ethan accepted that, not because he was necessarily convinced, but because it wasn't his line to push. Not yet. The board meeting, he said. 2 hours. What do you need? She looked at him. I need you to tell the truth. About what specifically? About last night. About what you saw. About what I did, or didn't do, when it happened. She pressed her palms flat on the table. My father is going to argue that the attack demonstrates that a CEO with physical limitations creates a target. That my disability is a security liability. That the company cannot afford the risk. She said it all cleanly, like reading from a document. I need someone in that room who was there, who saw that I didn't hide behind my limitations. Who can say, without being paid to say it, that I stood up? The last 2 words hung differently than the others. Ethan heard what she meant. She hadn't been able to run. She hadn't been able to move the way an able-bodied person might have in that moment. But she had stood at that podium, and she had not broken, and she had not flinched. And she had, in the seconds before he reached her, held her ground in the only way available to her. You did stand up, he said. I know that, she said quietly. But I need someone else to say it. He nodded. All right. You don't have to. I said, all right. She studied him. You understand, this becomes part of the story. Your story. A maintenance worker walking into a Sterling Industries board meeting. I've been in worse rooms. This will generate more press. I know. Your daughter is 9 years old and already has opinions about security positioning, he said. She'll manage. Something moved through Victoria's eyes. Not quite amusement, but something warm and quick. It was gone before it fully arrived. Okay. Okay, he said. Tell me what I'm walking into. The Sterling Industries boardroom occupied the top floor of the building and had the particular atmosphere of a place where large amounts of money changed direction. 12 chairs around a long table. 7 board members present in person. 2 on screens at the far end. Holt at the door. Dana against the wall with her tablet. And at the far end of the table, in a dark suit that fit the way expensive things fit when they've been made specifically for the person wearing them, Edward Sterling. He was a tall man still. 70s had not reduced him. He carried the decade the way men of his particular breed carry everything, as further evidence of endurance. His hair was fully white, and his eyes were his daughter's eyes, which was the most disorienting thing about him, because Victoria's eyes were weapons she used with purpose. and Edwards with the same model of weapon, deployed with a different, quieter kind of precision. He looked at Ethan when he came in, and his expression did exactly one thing. It registered, classified, filed. Then it became neutral. "Mr. Cole," he said, "I'm told we owe you a considerable debt." "Good afternoon," Ethan said. He sat beside Victoria, across the table from her father. He noted the positions of the other board members, most of them carefully neutral. A couple visibly uncertain why this man was here. One older woman at the middle of the table, who looked at Ethan with open appraisal, and then gave him a small, contained nod that he read as, "I already know what happened. I want to see how you carry it." Victoria opened the meeting. She spoke for 11 minutes without notes. She covered the events of the previous night in precise operational language: the security breach, the response, the outcome. She covered the merger timeline and the current status of the Caldwell deal. She covered the company's security protocols and the specific changes she was implementing, effective immediately. She spoke in the voice she used for rooms like this one: controlled, authoritative, without visible heat. And she gave the board nothing to read except competence. Then her father spoke. He was measured. He was warm. He expressed relief at his daughter's safety with an emotion that sounded genuine. Because, Ethan thought, it probably was. In the same way that Edward Sterling's concern for the company was genuine. And in his mind, the two things were the same concern, dressed differently. "I think we all share immense gratitude," Edward said, looking briefly at Ethan in a way that was both acknowledgement and dismissal, "for the extraordinary response of the individuals who intervened last night. And I think that gratitude, and the circumstances that made it necessary, are precisely why we owe it to this company and its shareholders to ask a hard question." He paused. "Is the current leadership configuration creating exposure that the company should not have to bear?" Nobody spoke. "Victoria is exceptional. I would say that under any circumstances, because it is simply true. But exceptional leadership can coexist with structural risk. What happened last night is evidence, and I say this with great respect and greater sorrow, that the specific and visible nature of Victoria's condition makes her a more identifiable, more targetable figure. And in a threat environment like the one the company now— May I say something?" It was Ethan's voice, quiet, level, the kind of voice that didn't need volume because it was built on something heavier. Every head in the room turned. Edward Sterling paused in the particular way that powerful men pause when they are interrupted. Not alarmed, but recalibrating. "Mr. Cole." "I was there last night," Ethan said. "I was 15 feet from your daughter when that gun came up. And I want to tell you exactly what I saw, because I think it's relevant to what you just said." Edward gestured graciously. "Of course. I saw a man target her specifically, not because of how she was positioned, not because she was in a wheelchair, or because she moved differently, or because she was more visible than the other 200 people in that room. He targeted her because she was the most powerful person in the room, and he'd been sent to remove that power." He looked at Edward directly. "That's not a disability problem. That's a success problem. You target people because of what they have, not what they lack." The room was very still. "She was at the podium," Ethan continued, "in front of 200 people, with a gunman pointing a weapon at her head. And she did not move. Not because she couldn't, because she chose not to give him the satisfaction of seeing her run." He let that sit for a moment. "I've served with soldiers who trained for years to hold that kind of discipline in that kind of moment. Your daughter did it in a dress at her own company dinner. I wouldn't call that a liability. I'd call it command presence." Another silence. The older woman at the middle of the table, her nameplate read Patricia Howe, board director, was looking at Ethan with an expression that had moved well past appraisal. Edward Sterling sat with his hands folded. His face had done exactly nothing during Ethan's statement, which was its own kind of answer. "Mr. Cole," he said, in a tone that was still warm, but had acquired a particular texture beneath the warmth, like something smooth over something hard. "Your perspective is genuinely valued here, and your actions last night were remarkable. But board governance is a complex matter, and—" "I understand that," Ethan said. "I'm not here to vote on anything. I'm here because she asked me to tell the truth about what I saw. And I did." He leaned back slightly. "I'll leave the complex matters to you." It was dismissal delivered so cleanly and so quietly that it took the room half a second to recognize it as such. Patricia Howe pressed her lips together in a way that suggested she was preventing herself from smiling. Edward Sterling looked at his daughter. Victoria was looking back at him. She hadn't said a word during Ethan's statement. She didn't need to. She sat straight in her chair, hands still, face still, and let the words stand where they'd been placed. "The board will take a brief recess," she said. 15 minutes. Ethan went out into the corridor with Holt while the board moved around inside. "That," Holt said, "was one of the better things I've seen in a boardroom." "I just told them what happened." "There's a version of telling what happened that lasts 4 minutes, and a version that lasts 11 minutes and changes the temperature of the room. You did the second one." Ethan leaned against the wall. His shoulder was making itself known again, the slow, insistent pulse that had been his companion since last night. "How's it going to go?" "The vote? Better than it would have gone without you in there." Holt glanced at the boardroom doors. "Edward won't win today. He knows that now. But Edward is a patient man." "She knows that too." "She does." Holt paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why'd you do it? Last night? You had no obligation. You were below your floor. You could have stayed where you were, called in what you heard. Let security handle it." Ethan looked at the floor for a moment. It was a real question, and it deserved a real answer. "In Fallujah," he said. "Second tour. We were running a patrol and we hit a situation fast. My sergeant, good man, 22 years in, he froze. Just for a second. Long enough. I moved because he didn't, and 3 guys made it home who might not have." He paused. "My sergeant asked me the same question afterward. Why did you move? You didn't have to." "What did you tell him?" I said, because I could." Ethan looked up. "That's still the answer. I could see it happening. I had the ability to do something about it. What kind of person sees something they could stop and doesn't move?" Holt was quiet for a moment. "A lot of people, actually." "I know," Ethan said. "I don't say that to judge them. I just know I'm not built that way." The boardroom door opened. Dana leaned out. "They're ready." The vote was 8-1. The 1 was Edward Sterling, who cast it without visible emotion and sat with his hands still folded while the result was announced. He looked, in that moment, like a man updating a long-term plan rather than acknowledging a defeat. Victoria noted it. Ethan noted it. The older woman, Patricia Howe, noted it with the sharp, experienced eyes of someone who had been in rooms like this for 3 decades and knew the difference between a loss and a repositioning. After the meeting, in the corridor outside, Edward Sterling approached Ethan. He came alone. No aide, no intermediary. That was a choice. The choice of a man who wanted this conversation off the record, outside the structure, in the informal register where the real terms get discussed. "Mr. Cole," he said, "a word." Ethan waited. "What you did last night was extraordinary. I want you to know that I mean that without reservation. Thank you.
And what you said in there about my daughter was generous and effective. A small pause. You have a gift for reading rooms. I've had practice. Edward Sterling looked at him with those eyes. Victoria's eyes. Older, more calculated. I'd like to offer you a position, formally. A role in Sterling Industries' Security and Operations Division. Director level. The compensation would be— No, Ethan said. Edward stopped. You haven't heard. No, Ethan said again. Thank you. May I ask why? Because you're not offering it to help me. You're offering it to own what I said in that room. To be able to say that my testimony came from a Sterling Industries employee with a vested interest. He looked at Edward evenly. And because your daughter asked me not to take anything from you before I understood what it was for. She was right. Something moved through Edward Sterling's face, a flicker of something. Was it respect? Surprise? Reassessment? It was brief and well-controlled, but it was there. She told you that. She did. She's always been direct, Edward said, and for just a fraction of a second, underneath the strategy and the calculation, there was something else in his voice. Something that might, in a different life, have been simple pride. She gets that from her mother. Ethan said nothing. Edward straightened. You're going to be part of her story now, Mr. Cole, whether you want to be or not. I know. She doesn't let people in easily. I noticed. And she doesn't ask for help. I noticed that too. Edward looked at him for a long moment. Take care of her, he said, and then, as if he'd surprised himself, she won't ask you to, but she needs someone who doesn't need to be asked. He walked away down the corridor, and Ethan watched him go and thought about all the ways a person can love someone and still be the thing they're most afraid of. Victoria was at the window of the empty boardroom when he came back in. Dana had stepped out. Holt was down the hall. It was just the two of them in the long, quiet room, with the city below doing its indifferent, glittering thing. He offered you something, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. You said no. Yes. She turned from the window. You didn't have to do that. I know. The money would have been— Victoria. She stopped. I have a daughter, he said. I have a truck that needs a new alternator. I have a job, which I may or may not still have, depending on Gerald's memory of last night. I have real, concrete, immediate financial concerns. He looked at her. And I still said no. So let's not talk about the money. She looked at him. The controlled expression had something different in it now. Not cracked, not broken, but inhabited differently. Like someone had finally turned a light on inside a room that had been running on emergency power for a long time. What do you want, Ethan? She asked. Not from me, just, what do you want? From any of this? It was a real question. He could hear that she meant it as a real question. He thought about Lily pressing her forehead against his ribs that morning. He thought about Sarah. He thought about 3 tours and a maintenance job and 11 minutes in a parking garage. He thought about the way invisible feels when you've been it for so long that you stop noticing the weight of it. I want my daughter to be safe, he said. I want to matter to the people I'm supposed to matter to. And I want to not wake up in 10 years and realize I spent all of them making myself small so other people could be comfortable. The room was very quiet. That's not a small thing to want, Victoria said. No, he said, it isn't. She looked out the window again, and her hands, resting on the arms of her chair, loosened slightly.
The way hands loosen when a decision has been made that the body agrees with before the mind finishes making it. "I'm going to offer you something," she said, "and I want you to hear the whole thing before you answer." "All right." "Not a title, not a position, not something that puts you in my debt or me in yours." She turned to look at him. "A partnership. In the specific and limited sense that we are two people who are now, whether we like it or not, in the middle of the same situation, and who might be better equipped to get through it together than separately." He looked at her. "The people who sent those men are still out there," she said. "The merger closes in 11 days. My father is going to keep moving his pieces on the board. And you and your daughter are visible now, in a way that doesn't go away just because the news cycle moves on." She paused. "I have resources. You have, and I mean this precisely, a quality of judgment and perception that money cannot buy, and that I have spent my entire career surrounded by people who don't have." "You want me close," he said. "I want someone real close," she said. "I have spent 12 years building walls and calling them strategy. Last night, someone nearly killed me, and the person who stopped it was a man I had never looked at." Her voice didn't waver, but something underneath it did. "I don't want to not look at people anymore." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "My daughter comes with me," he said. "Not everywhere. But she's not getting parked somewhere while I disappear into your world." "I wouldn't ask that." "And I work for you, not the other way around, clearly and formally. I don't want ambiguity about what this is." "Agreed. And when I think you're wrong, I'll say so. I expect nothing less." He looked at her for a long moment. Outside, the city moved. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. Neither of them said anything after that. There was a particular kind of silence that settles after a real agreement. Not the silence of nothing to say, but the silence of enough said. The silence of two people who have looked directly at each other and decided to stay in the same room. It was the first time in a long time that Ethan Cole had been in a room and felt, precisely, like exactly what he was. Not invisible, not a symbol, not a headline, just a man, present, seen. And somewhere across the city, in a third-floor apartment, a 9-year-old girl with a cracked tablet and her father's army cap was sitting by the window, watching two men in dark jackets who really did need to stop looking at their phones, and waiting for him to come home and tell her what came next. Marcus drove him home. The city moved past the windows the way it always did. Indifferent, bright, doing the 10,000 things a city does at 4 in the afternoon on a Thursday that has no idea it's supposed to feel significant. Ethan watched it and didn't try to make it mean anything. He'd learned a long time ago that meaning doesn't live in the scenery. It lives in what you decide to do when you get where you're going. His phone buzzed. The new one. The one Victoria had sent, which he'd been carrying in his jacket pocket like an unanswered question since last night, and which he'd finally turned on that morning, because the cracked screen on his old one had given up entirely somewhere around noon. He looked at it. A text from a Louisville area code. "I saw the news. I owe you a call, if you're willing. Ray." He put the phone face down on his knee and looked out the window. Ray Fulton, his father-in-law, the man who had stood in a hospital corridor 3 years after Sarah died and said the thing that couldn't be unsaid. Ethan had carried that sentence the way you carry shrapnel that the surgeons decide is safer to leave in. Aware of it always, working around it, never fully without it. He didn't text back. Not yet. Some things needed more than a text. Marcus pulled up to the building. The news vans were gone. They'd moved on, the way Holt had predicted, to whatever the next story was. The two men in dark jackets were still there, but they'd taken Ethan's feedback to heart, apparently, because they were standing further apart, and neither of them had a phone in hand. Small victories. "Same time tomorrow?" Marcus asked as Ethan opened the door. Ethan paused. "You don't have to. Miss Sterling asked me to make myself available to you for the next 2 weeks," Marcus said. "I'm not available to anybody else during that time. So yes or no, Mr. Cole?" Ethan looked at him. "Same time tomorrow." "Yes, sir." He went upstairs. Lily was at the kitchen table with her homework spread out in front of her, and the focused, slightly pained expression she wore when math was involved. Mrs. Petrov was in the armchair by the window with her knitting, which meant she'd been there all day, which meant Ethan owed her something significant and would need to figure out what that was. "Daddy?" Lily looked up. Her eyes tracked immediately to his shoulder, to the way he was holding his arm, to the slight stiffness in his gait. She'd been doing that all day. He suspected she was going to be doing it for a while. "Hey, Bug!" Mrs. Petrov put down her knitting and stood with the careful deliberateness of a woman in her late 70s who had decided years ago that her joints were an inconvenience rather than a limitation. She looked at Ethan with eyes that had seen enough decades of human behavior to have very little patience for performance. Then she opened her arms. He went. He let her hug him, carefully because she was small and his shoulder, and she said something quietly against his collarbone that he thought was Polish and that Lily had said was probably a blessing, and he believed it because it felt like one. "You eat?" she said, pulling back. "Not much. I made soup." "Thank you, Mrs. Petrov." "Don't thank me. Eat." She turned back to the armchair, picked up her knitting, and settled back in with the air of someone who had said what needed to be said and was now done with the conversation. Lily was still watching him. He sat down across from her at the table. "How was school?" "Everyone knew," she said. "I figured. Tommy Ramirez said you were probably going to be on TV and asked if he could come over." "What did you say?" "I said probably not." "Good call." "My teacher, Miss Aldridge, asked me in front of everybody if I was okay." Lily's voice had the particular flatness it got when she was relating something that had embarrassed her, but that she was too proud to fully admit embarrassed her. "In front of everybody." "That must have been—" "It was a lot," Lily said, which was the word she used when something was actually hard. "Everybody kept looking at me." "I'm sorry." "It's not your fault." "It's a little my fault." "It's a little your fault," she agreed. Then, looking at her math worksheet, she said, "Are you going to be on TV?" "Probably." "Can I watch?" "We'll see." "That means yes." "That means we'll see." She picked up her pencil, put it back down. "Daddy, the lady, Ms. Sterling." "Yeah?" "Are you going to work for her now?" He looked at his daughter, 9 years old, 2 missing front teeth growing back in, slower than she wanted. His army cap was on the counter behind her, where she'd left it this morning. She had her mother's eyes, and her mother's directness, and a patience for ambiguity that was entirely her own, built from 9 years of being the child of a man who worked nights and kept the hardest parts of himself in a box under his bed. "Yeah," he said. "I think so. For a while." "What does that mean? Like, instead of here?" "Different work. Better hours. We'd be okay, Lily. More than okay." She processed this. "Is she nice?" He'd answered this before. This time he thought about it longer. "She's real," he said. "She doesn't pretend to be something she isn't. That's better than nice." Lily considered this with the serious deliberation she gave to things that actually mattered. Okay, she said finally, then picked up her pencil and went back to the math, which was, he understood, her way of saying, I trust you. Don't make me say it out loud. Mrs. Petrov's soup was chicken. It was extraordinary. He ate 2 bowls standing at the counter and felt, incrementally, like a person again. He called Ray Fulton after Lily was in bed. It was 10:15. He sat on the edge of his own bed in the dark and dialed and listened to it ring and prepared himself for any version of the conversation that might come. The angry one, the sentimental one, the one where Ray said something that would need to be absorbed and put away and lived with. Ethan, Ray's voice, older than he remembered, grayer somehow, even over the phone. Thank you for calling back. You asked me to. I did. A pause. The kind of pause that has a lot of room in it. I've been sitting here all day looking at the television. Looking at... He stopped. Started again. You look like you always looked. When you'd come home. That thing you do with your face. What thing? Like you're deciding whether the room is safe. You've always done it. I used to watch you do it at the dinner table. Sarah used to say... He stopped again. The name sat in the air between 2 states, 2 cities, 2 men who had loved the same woman and lost her and handled that loss by turning away from each other. What did she say? Ethan asked. And he didn't know he was going to ask it until it was already said. Ray was quiet for a moment. She said it was the thing she loved most about you, that you were always watching, that she never felt unsafe when you were in a room. His voice was uneven in the way that old grief gets uneven. Not fresh, not new, just worn thin in a specific place. I said something to you, at the anniversary. I said something that... Ray, I need to say this. Okay. I said something that was cruel and that wasn't true, and that I said because I was in pain, and I needed it to be someone's fault, and you were standing there. Ray exhaled. You didn't make her die. Her heart made her die. And I have known that every day since I said it, and I have been... A long pause. Too much of a coward to call you. Ethan sat in the dark. His shoulder throbbed. The apartment was quiet. She was my wife, Ethan said finally. And she was your daughter. And we both lost her. That's all it is. That's not all I made it. No, but that's what it is. Another silence. Then Ray said roughly, Lily? She's good. She's really good. She look like her? More every year. Ray made a sound that wasn't words. Ethan gave him a moment for it. I'd like to see her, Ray said. If you'd allow it. If Lily would. I'll talk to her, Ethan said. I think she'd want that. She doesn't know much about her mother's family. That's my fault, too. We can do the fault accounting later. Right now, let's just say yes. Yes, Ray said quickly, like he was afraid the word might be revoked. Yes. They talked for 40 minutes. About nothing heavy. About Lily, about Louisville, about the Cardinals, about Ray's bad knee and his neighbor's dog, and the soup he'd been learning to make since his wife passed 4 years ago. Normal things. The kind of conversation that is really about something else entirely, that is really about 2 people deciding that the distance between them can be crossed, if they're both willing to start walking. When he hung up, Ethan sat in the dark for a while. Then he went and stood in Lily's doorway and watched her sleep, the way he'd been doing since the night she was born, and he'd stood in a different doorway and felt the absolute, terrifying weight of being someone's entire world. She was still. She was safe. She was here. That was enough. That was always enough. 11 days. The merger closed on a Tuesday. Ethan knew before the official announcement because Victoria texted him at 6:47 in the morning. One line, no punctuation. It's done.
He was in the middle of making Lily's lunch, peanut butter on whole wheat, no crusts, which had been a hill he'd long ago decided wasn't worth dying on. He texted back, "Congratulations." She replied, "Come in at 9. We have a situation." The situation turned out to be that the hedge fund that had shorted Sterling stock had filed a civil complaint, a nuisance suit, her legal team called it, with the particular confidence of people who are paid to project confidence, though Ethan had learned to read the layer beneath the projection, and that 2 of the men connected to the original attack had started talking to the DA's office in exchange for consideration. Names were coming out. Connections were surfacing. None of the names so far pointed to Edward Sterling. Ethan sat across from Victoria in the conference room they'd started using as a de facto office, because it had a door and a view and enough space for his particular way of thinking, which involved standing up and walking the perimeter when things got complicated. "Your father's clean," he said. "So far." "Do you think he'll stay clean?" She looked at him steadily. "I think my father would never directly involve himself in something that could be traced. I think he may have said things, in the way that powerful people say things without saying them, to people who were already motivated to act. But you can't prove that." "No." "And you're not going to pursue it?" She held his gaze. "He's my father." "I know." "That doesn't mean I'm protecting him. It means I'm not going to spend the next 10 years of my life trying to prove something unprovable about the man who raised me, when I have a company to run and a deal to close and—" She stopped. "He knows I know." That's enough. Ethan thought about Edward Sterling in the corridor after the board meeting. Take care of her. She won't ask you to. He thought about the flicker in the old man's eyes when he talked about Victoria. He thought about how the most complicated grief is the kind that runs alongside love, parallel, touching at the edges, and how some families spend their whole lives navigating the place where those 2 things meet. "Okay," he said. "Okay?" "I said okay." She looked at him like she was waiting for more. He didn't give her more. She'd made her decision with her eyes open. That was all he needed to know. 3 weeks after the gala, Victoria Sterling held a company-wide meeting. Not a press conference. Not a polished, pre-written statement delivered to cameras. She gathered the full staff of Sterling Industries, corporate, operations, facilities, maintenance, security, every level, in the building's main atrium, and she spoke without notes. Ethan stood at the back with Holt. He'd been in the building 3 weeks now. He knew most of the names. He'd learned the rhythms, who got in early, who ate lunch at their desk, who the people were that everyone else actually went to when something was broken, regardless of their title. He'd become, in the specific way he always became in any environment, the person who saw what other people didn't look at. Victoria was at the front of the atrium. No podium, no stage. She was in her chair, at floor level, in the middle of a space that held 400 people, and she looked like she owned every cubic inch of it. "3 weeks ago," she said, "someone tried to kill me. And the person who stopped it was a man that this company, and I include myself in that, had never looked at." The atrium was absolutely still. "His name is Ethan Cole. He was a maintenance worker in a hotel where I was holding a dinner. He was told to stay below the 10th floor. He heard something wrong, and he moved anyway. And because he moved, I'm standing here." She paused. I say standing loosely. A ripple of surprised, relieved laughter. She let it settle. "I've been thinking about invisibility since that night. About the people in any organization, in this organization, who do essential things and receive almost nothing in return for them. Not just financially. I mean the more fundamental thing. The thing where you walk past someone every day and don't see them. Don't know their name. Don't know what they carry.
Her voice was even and precise, but something underneath it was not. I've run this company for 12 years, and I have been guilty of that. Profoundly guilty. And I'm not going to stand here and tell you that's going to change because I had a scary night and learned a lesson. I'm going to tell you that it's going to change because I've put specific, accountable structures in place to make it change. Because lessons without structures are just good intentions. And I don't run a company on good intentions. Ethan listened. He thought about Gerald, who had called him a good man, in a voice that seemed surprised by its own sincerity. He thought about the fluorescent tube he'd been replacing when the radio went wrong. He thought about the parking garage, and the 11 minutes, and the ceiling of his truck, and the moment he decided to get out anyway. "The man who saved my life," Victoria said, "did not do it for recognition. He did it because he could see something happening, and he was built in a way that did not allow him to look away." She looked toward the back of the atrium and found him, and the look was brief and direct and contained everything that a more sentimental person might have put into a longer speech. That quality, the refusal to look away, is what I want this company to be. Afterward, in the corridor, Patricia Howe found him. She was the board director, the older woman who'd given him that small nod in the boardroom 3 weeks ago. She was in her late 60s, sharp and economical in the way of someone who had spent decades having to be both. "Mr. Cole," she said. "A moment. Ms. Howe. I've been watching you work these past few weeks," she said, "from a board perspective. What you've done with the security review, the worker advocacy pilot you proposed to HR, the way you talk to people in this building. It's all preliminary," he said. "It's impressive," she said. "And I don't use that word loosely." She looked at him directly. "Victoria made a good call. I want you to know that the board sees that." "She made the call herself." "She did," Patricia agreed. "That's what a good call looks like." She offered her hand. He shook it. She walked away with the brisk, purposeful walk of a woman who was always somewhere next. He picked up Lily from school that afternoon. She came out of the building in the particular way she had. Fast, slightly sideways, always looking at something nobody else was looking at. She'd lost a bet with Tommy Ramirez, apparently, and was therefore required to admit that fractions were not completely useless. She reported this with great solemnity. They got burgers, real ones, from the place on Clement Street that had been there since before Ethan was born, and that put enough grease in the bag to make the paper translucent, which Lily considered the mark of quality. They sat across from each other in a booth. "How was the meeting?" Lily asked. She asked about the office now, about Victoria, about Holt, about the deal and the lawsuit and the board, in the way that kids absorb the texture of a parent's work life when the parent actually comes home at a normal hour and is present enough to be asked. "Good," he said. "Victoria gave a speech." "Was it good?" "Yeah, it was." "About you?" "A little. About the company." "But about you, though, Lily." "I'm just saying." He ate his burger. She ate hers with the systematic efficiency of someone who had priorities. "Daddy," she said after a moment. "Yeah?" "Grandpa Ray called me today." He put down his food. "He called you directly?" "On Mrs. Petrov's phone. She said it was okay." Lily's voice was careful, the careful she used when she was unsure of the emotional landscape. "He sounds old." "He is old." "He cried." Ethan was quiet. "Not like crying, Lily said. Just like his voice did the thing. You know the thing voices do." "Yeah," Ethan said. "I know." "He said he has pictures of my mom, from when she was little." She looked at her food. "I don't have very many pictures of her from when she was little." "I know, Bug." He said he could send them, or— She picked up a fry, put it down. Or we could come visit. He has a dog now. I heard. It sounds annoying, she said, in a voice that meant the opposite. Then quietly, Can we go? Sometime? He looked at his daughter. She had her mother's eyes looking back at him across a booth with a translucent grease bag between them, and the afternoon light doing the thing it does in October, coming in sideways, making everything look like something worth keeping. Yeah, he said. We can go. She nodded, picked up her fry, ate it, moved on with the clean, decisive efficiency of a child who has gotten the answer she needed and is done waiting. That night, after she was in bed, he called Victoria. She picked up on the second ring, which meant she was still working, which she always was. Cole. The complaint filed by the hedge fund, he said. Holt sent me the summary. There's a name in the supporting documents. An attorney who processed payments for both the hedge fund and Caldwell's original acquisition team. A pause. I saw it. It connects back to something from before the merger, before the attack. I know. You knew this morning. Yes. You didn't say anything in the meeting. I wanted to think about it first. He leaned back. Victoria, I'm thinking. Think faster. If that name gets to the DA before we understand what it means— I know what it means, she said, and her voice had the quiet intensity it got when she was moving pieces that other people hadn't seen yet. It means someone built a contingency plan before the attack, in case the attack didn't work. A pause. It means this isn't over. No, he said, it isn't. A silence between them, not uncomfortable, not uncertain. The silence of two people who have been in enough situations to know when a situation is ongoing, and who have decided, without needing to say it again, that they're facing the ongoing thing together. Get some sleep, she said. You too. I'll sleep when the merger is clean. The merger is done. The aftermath of the merger, she said, is what it's called when the thing isn't actually done. Good night, Victoria. Good night, Ethan. He hung up, set the phone on the nightstand, looked at the ceiling. The cracked phone was in the drawer. The new one was on the nightstand. He'd stopped thinking of it as an unanswered question about 3 days ago. Somewhere around the time he'd stopped thinking of the whole thing as something that had happened to him, and started thinking of it as something he had walked into, eyes open, feet moving, the way he always moved when he could see something happening, and his particular, stubborn, soldier's heart refused to look away. The wound was healing, not fast. Wounds don't heal fast when you won't stop using the arm, which the doctor had told him twice, and which he had nodded at and immediately ignored. But steadily, in the way that things heal when they're not fighting the process. Down the hall, Lily was asleep. Across the city, Victoria Sterling was at her desk, thinking 3 moves ahead. In Louisville, Ray Fulton had a dog, and a phone, and a box of photographs that a little girl didn't know existed yet. And Ethan Cole, maintenance worker, soldier, father, the man nobody saw until the night he made himself impossible to miss, lay in the dark of his apartment on the 3rd floor of a building with 1 deadbolt and a chain lock he'd finally replaced, and understood, for the first time in longer than he could name, that his life was not something happening around him. It was something he was building, piece by piece, choice by choice, the way everything worth having gets built. Not in a single moment of crisis, not in a headline or a security footage clip, or the clean arc of a thrown tool bag, but in the quiet, daily, unglamorous accumulation of showing up. For your daughter. For the people who need someone to move when everyone else freezes. For yourself. even when yourself is the last thing that feels like a priority. He had moved. He had always moved. And now, finally, he was somewhere worth arriving.